So what I wanted to do is give everybody on the board just kind of an update as to where we stand as the expression of interest process has obviously begun, and where the discussions have taken us, and kind of make sure everybody understands kind of the steps that have transpired since the EOI opened, and then obviously the submissions deadline came. So from a timeline, just as an update, the end of the EOI's the submission deadline was April 8th. The process started in, I'll say late December. It was late December, early January. I think it was advertised around the 22nd of December. So we started taking questions, etc. Early January. Part of this process, as you may have recalled, there were 5 addendums as the expression of interest process kind of played out. Those were all done as a result of questions and comments that were coming in from potential submitters. As a result, on April 8th, there was one submission that was received at the deadline that actually happened to be from the previous facility down in the Bayside. So from a selection standpoint, it was sort of a simpler process to be able to begin, I'll say, meetings or discussions since it was just the one. We did have several, as I mentioned in those addendums, we did have several interested groups. However, when that submission did go or end on April 8th, we did just end up with just the one. So after we had kind of looked through that initial or that submission, the first meeting we reached out and we met with Rob and Tom, who were the submitters, also owners of former Bayside. Myself and the supervisor met with them. And basically the intent of that was, I'll get on the next slide or in a couple slides, just sort of allow them to have an opportunity to go through this submission. As a result of that meeting, we ended up having a second one with them a few weeks ago, back on June 14th. Kind of brings us to where we are now. So there's been 2 face-to-face meetings with Rob and Tom since this process is wrapped up. Just for general information, I did not put all the information, and I didn't include that in here, but I did pull out a number of the topics that either were pertinent to the discussions that we had in either of the meetings, but also relevant to the information that was submitted in the EOI. So some of the things that was asked as part of that expression of interest related around the vision, the information that was shared was, that the vision of that restaurant or that facility is to operate in a very similar manner as with the original restaurant, with improvements specifically to accommodate more customers. Bayside or the restaurant would expect to have around $600,000 in their estimation in pre-opening costs. Some of those include things such as trade and work, kitchen equipment, initial inventory, insurance, signage, computer system. And again, that's assuming from a building or a facility standpoint, that's a shell or a vanilla box. So basically provided them that structure, and then they would take care of the inside to the tune of around $600,000. As part of the EOI, we did ask for some information from an expense breakdown. One of the items that was listed in the expression of interest, they did list what, and I know it's not technically called a rent, but that's the common term for their monthly payback. And they had that listed out at $3,600 a month, which is about on par where they were at the end of their operation. One of the assumptions that they had listed, again, as I mentioned, is just the vanilla box, which is basically the roof, exterior walls, floors, windows, and then an unfinished interior. One of the assumptions that they did have in the UI was seeking a credit or some sort of a rent concession to finish that interior. And that would be a negotiation piece. They were seeking a 10-year minimum agreement. Obviously, as you're aware in some of our discussions, we can go up to a 15-year. So that was reassuring. And then the restaurant, one of the items that they also listed as part of their assumption is that the facility would be responsible basically for all interior items, any type of repair, et cetera, inside. All exterior repairs, maintenance would be the responsibility of town. Things like the mowing, landscaping, plowing, building, anything on the outside of the building along with dock repair. And I only point that out because that's a little different than sort of the situation that's down there now, especially from mowing, plowing, et cetera. That's not the town's responsibility. From a meeting standpoint, this is the two meetings that we had back in May and then again a couple weeks ago. First meeting, as I mentioned, just sort of an opportunity for us to kind of hear what their vision is as opposed to reading it through that expression of interest, just to kind of understand where they thought this new facility may, or how it may fit in. We're specific as to sort of their mindset or their vision as to how it fit into this area. We've heard a lot of comments about fit within that area. One of the things that I did mention in that meeting is the way that Sandbar Park area was, I'll say viewed, or sort of the perception was that it was a restaurant location with the investment that the town now has in that area. Obviously, our intent is that the perception is that it's a park first. So ideally what we're looking for is a facility that will sort of match that and not try to either overshadow or be part of the background. We want it to be, from a cooperative standpoint, part of that location. We asked just from an expense standpoint, just some of their annual expense and initial investment around their $600,000, just to give them an opportunity to share some of their reasoning behind some of those costs. Again, we talked about the term length, and obviously being able to have a longer term length than what was noted in the expression of interest was a plus. And then also, we did talk a little bit about the design approach to the building in regards to what the building may look like, the size of the building. Obviously, we know is sort of maxed out at a max of 2,400 square feet. Does it need to be that large? Is that their intent to go that large? Is it a one-story, two-story? So those kind of things. Got a little bit of better understanding of what their approach is for what that building would or could look like. After that first meeting, one of the things that came out of it, there were a couple of, I'll say, agenda items or to-dos. One was to investigate a land lease option, and then also how the payback of that loan for that shell or vanilla box may work out. So the second meeting, we discussed real briefly that the land lease really doesn't pertain to be an option for that location, for that business. And then from a payback of a loan for the building, again, I'll use the word rent. The question comes, does the town need to collect the total amount due, or are we able to collect less than what may be due in regards to the debt service? And that's really where I think we are with part of this presentation tonight, is to give the information to the town board for their, so that they can make a decision on that. In regards to the loan, one of the things Paul was able to do is, from a dollar and cent standpoint, obviously we've been using that 2,400 max square foot, so that numbers could change a little bit if building size does go down. But again, based on the EOI, using a 2,400 square foot building, along with a, I don't want to say expected, but a requested 4,000 square foot exterior patio space, that cost would be somewhere around $1 million. That's, again, factoring in the vanilla box, and again, the cost today is what they were 2-3 years ago when this process may have started. Obviously, it is a little different, but that number is also very similar to where, or what we were given when Password started this process. So just using that $1 million, this type of a bond has a shorter shelf life, so it's a 15-year versus a 30-year. Also has a slightly higher interest rate due to it being a public-private situation. So $1 million bond over 15 years, it breaks down to about $90,000 per year. Divide that over 12 months if you want to calculate again rent, so to speak. It breaks down to about $7,500 per month. Again, from a future consideration, one of the things in regards to programming, we know one of the location and the features that are going into that park, but it is the intent of the Parks and Rec Department that location, Sandbar, will be used from a programming standpoint for passive recreation, and any business that's operating, as I mentioned, should also have a similar interest in regards to being collaborative in providing what's best for the community to that area. Obviously, the town is investing, as Paul just got done a few minutes ago, going over the capital costs. We're investing quite a bit. So ideally, what we're trying to do is create that area as a destination. And as I mentioned before, it's really sort of going to be the emphasis of our department is to create that as a destination area, whether that's just through programming or awareness to the community of the different features that are going to be now part of that location that worked before. So we're excited from that standpoint to be able to make this again, what I'll say a true destination area from a park standpoint. And then obviously from the town, from a consideration standpoint, that the payback of that loan for the building of a shell or that vanilla box, again, using that $1 million model, and again, that could be plus or minus, but again, current environment that seems to be an appropriate number. We are reaching out, trying to see if we can get a little bit more of I'll say a fine-tuned number, but again, for calculation purposes, that seems to be a pretty good figure to be able to focus on. Questions?
Chris, how old was the previous building that they were paying $3,500 a month?
How old was the building?
Yeah, it's pretty old, right?
Extremely. What's that?
They were paying,
Yeah.
at the time they were paying $3,500 for quite a
Correct.
building. And they're looking at a rent fee of $3,600 a month, correct? That's right.
Correct. As part of their expense
Right.
expense breakdown, that's what they have listed.
So they're expecting a $600,000 in pre-opening costs for, obviously the interior infrastructure. They're also seeking a credit or rent concession to finish the interior. Any dollar amount talked about that?
We haven't got to that point of the discussion yet.
As far as the square footage of the building, 2,400 square feet that's a good sized building. So you're going to be having further discussion, I take it, with respect to what the need would be.
Well, 2,400 is about 800 square feet bigger than what was done there previously. And again, these are all our maximum numbers that we know. Obviously,
Right.
there's still the process of going to the state to be able to get that approved. So that 2,400 could be either approved or it could be, we could run into a situation where they decide that 2,400 is too large of a facility and it needs to be a 1,600.
So the state has the jurisdiction of deciding how.
The DEC.
DEC does? Okay. Has there been any preliminary discussions with DEC with respect to square footage?
Yeah, so as part of this whole Sandbar Park project, there's been, I'll say, not specific to that building, but all of our plans do show a facility at that location, and it does show a square footage of 2,400. So there's been a number of different discussions about it. It hasn't been narrowed down that this is going to be the exact square foot, because we haven't got to that point yet. But we do know that the max that we would be able to go to would be at 2,400.
And Chris, I mean, yeah, the DEC, we've had weekly Zoom or calls and whatever with, I think there's like 9 different government agencies on this about Sandbar Park, one of them being the DEC. And I've learned a new term, I guess, through this process. Is it impervious area? Impervious, right, Bill?
Impervious.
Right? Yeah, yeah.
Asphalt and
You got it. And so, one thing I learned is that until the DEC gives their blessing on this footprint, they seem to, through our meetings, they're saying, well, there was an 800 square foot barn, storage barn that was next to the Bayside, and then there was a 1,600 square foot Bayside. So those two buildings were impervious. So if you're building one building, just add the square foot of those two, and we'll go with that. That's the way they've kind of made it sound, for lack of better terms. It's funny, when you were reading some of the highlights of the EOI, the expression of interest that was submitted, they have Rob and Tom suggested a 4,000 square foot concrete patio. And I was like, wow, Bill, I would imagine that's impervious.
Right, I was just gonna ask that question.
And I've eaten there many times. I know that you got the patio that's out there right now. I know that 4,000 square feet is 200 feet by 200 feet. So it's kind of a detail, because I don't think the DEC will ever go with that, but they might go with like Drex decking that, the water goes through it into the ground. They wouldn't consider that, impervious.
they would, because it's a surface that the water has to hit and go off of. So it's anything that's being built that's non-porous
Yeah.
is considered impervious by DEC.
Yeah. Anyway, so, interesting. Any other questions or comments by the board on this?
Thank you for the updates.
And I will, Jenny?
Thank
Would you like I'll say, of course, obviously, Chris already stated that the meetings, I attended these meetings with Chris, and, another kind of a moving part on this thing is that a 2,400 square foot one-story building, or you go with a 3,200 square foot two-story building, and how does that affect, well, certainly it doesn't change the impervious, but I've been very interested in, and we've talked about it with Rob and Tom, is that this $1 million number has flown around for a while. A building and a patio, whatever, to cost $1 million. The reality is, and I'm talking about the shell, right, Matt? We're talking about that, delivering them to do the interior and all that. We haven't gone out and actually had an engineering firm do what you call, Bill, I think a PER,
Yes.
that would basically give a certain design and say that based on today's pricing and all that, that's $1 million. So it's interesting because this is kind of the issue, is that, and maybe it's not an issue, the $1 million, if the town has to pay $1 million to build this shell with the patio and whatever. Chris already said, and Paul has helped us with this, that's going to be $7,500 a month in debt financing. So we're struggling with, well, if we just indebted the town citizens for $7,500 a month, how do we justify only getting $3,500 a month in rent? Because there's a $4,000 delta there, which is about 50 grand a year. Now, to Rob and Tom's credit, I mean, they're putting up 600 grand into this thing, which, God bless them. But that doesn't change the fact that, and I'll put it to you this way. My brothers and I have owned commercial real estate, and we've done things in the past. Matt, you, and be in the commercial real estate, I'm going to ask your advice on something. I want to build a building, and it's going to cost me $1 million, and I'm going to get a mortgage on it, and it's going to cost me $7,500 a month, and I'm going to rent it out for $3,500. Why would I do that? Why would I be $4,000 short of my nut, so to speak, my monthly nut? Is there a, reasonable explanation on why I would do that?
Even for a municipality, I can't think.
Okay,
And if you were a bank, I don't think that you would give us the loan.
Absolutely not.
okay. Now, okay, now here's the thing, and honestly, but I want to switch back to that 1 million. I'm going to give you a tale of two cities that I've seen in 2 years as supervisor. And Art Patron's not here tonight, but Patty, you can corroborate if this story is true. Art's got that project going on over at the sewer plant. Phase 1, part of it was an accessory building. But we really never had the engineers do an in-depth PER. So they looked at it and they noodled it. Didn't do an in-depth one, and they said it was going to cost X. And Patty, Art, and I said, that just doesn't make any sense. So Art went out and they did a more in-depth thing, and wasn't the estimated cost come back like half of X?
Just about.
Okay. So is this $1 million a voodoo economics? Maybe a full PER bill, what does that stand for?
Professional performance engineering.
Report, or whatever, and maybe it would manifest that this only costs $500,000. Well, then this is not an issue. Because am I right to assume, Paul, that a $500,000 bond is half of $1 million bond? So the nut for the taxpayers in the town would be $3,750 a month. That's $7,500.
That's more like that.
Rob and Tom want to pay about $3,700 a month of rent. It sounds like we're there.
Sounds like you gotta build a $500,000 building.
Shell with whatever, right, Bill? Now, I just gave you I gave you the tale of two cities. That was the good one. Now I'm going to be the buzzkill.
There's another tale?
The sucking tail. You don't know your Dickens. Anyway, we all know it's June of 2022. What does it cost when gas is $5 a gallon? If we go out and do a PER with inflation the way it is and supply chains, what are we going to get back on the cost of a 2,400 square foot building? Shell, on a slab, whatever. I don't know.
Until you know.
So that's an interesting conundrum per se. And maybe it's not, because the board appetite might be that, hey, you know what? We feel fine about being $4,000 upside down at this thing because, whatever. Oh, I see some heads in the crowd shaking now. If the board does feel fine about that, I would say that anybody in this crowd and watching on TV who's a voter, you should vote us all out of office because we are not fiscally responsible and being stewards of the taxpayers' money. Now, the good news, in my opinion, is, and Chris, we don't have the engineers like Mary or Pat. I'll say Pat's kind of engineer or highway superintendent. But we got Bill. So I think you can corroborate this, Bill, and you maybe have heard it, is that because of what's happening there this summer down at Sandbar Park, has anybody driven down there to see what it looks like?
It's starting to look like a park.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of dirt being moved around. A lot of fill, huh, Bill?
Yep.
A lot of fill. And when they fill and bring that land up where the old Bayside used to be, which is the footprint where the new restaurant will go, I've been told that has got to settle for 6 months before any construction can start of a slab. Is that correct, Bill?
Yeah.
Well, it depends on how they fill it. Now, if they just filled it as fill and just laid it in and didn't compact every layer, then yeah, it's gonna take time to settle and.
Right. Well, next week is July 1st. That's not even close to being done. We think, Chris, we're gearing it around October 31st. By November 1, lo and behold, that's when the access bridge opens back up. We need it to be, good. I don't know. Could be seasonal things to this, whatever, but November 1, if the construction management says it is now a 6-month clock starts on its settling, you really can't start construction on any slab or whatever until, is that May 1st? Is that 6 months, May 1st? I guess what I'm trying to say is we have the luxury of time. But I also either want to get to brass tacks on this, I don't want to hold Rob and Tom up. Either we can come up with something that works for everybody, or we can't. So it really, to me, and I'm oversimplifying it as we sit here on June 23rd, we somehow figure out how to get a reasonable estimate of what this building is going to cost, the shell, and see if it's the $1 million that has been floating around out there, or if it's closer to 500,000. Or if we can't go and do that, and we just stick with the $1 million, then the board has to decide, in a way, are they okay with going down the primrose path of being $4,000 upside down?
I think we know the answer to that.
It's a rhetorical question, yeah. So, I don't know. I mean, thank you, Chris. I don't know the answer, because first of all, I don't think I could, in good faith, I couldn't say to Rob and Tom, why don't you go and spend your money on an engineer to do a PER? That's not fair. But then again, because whatever design of building we're going to do, so much of that is going to be the restaurateurs in there. I wouldn't even know what to tell an engineer and have the town pay for that, because we would have to be really far down the line with the restaurateur. We'd be probably into contracts and licensing agreements by that point, wouldn't we, Charlie?
Well, yes.
Yeah, because I can't advocate for the town spending that money on what? On what design? Because obviously, if the design, Bill, you know better, 2,400
Four
square
walls,
feet.
some windows and a roof, and you get a basic design.
So you think we could do that?
Sure. Be basic. Interior would be open. You'd have exterior walls and a roof, and a slab. Any interior walls that they needed, they would put up when they do the interior work.
With that font, do you think that 600,000 is enough to build that out inside?
I don't know. I don't know.
I don't either. It seems low to me when you consider all the equipment and everything else that's got.
Well, no, that's them.
No, I'm saying that, but they projected 600.
Oh, you're saying that
Their
them
projection
to
of
build from
600
the
to
shell.
build out, yep.
Right, and they're
Just
asking for
gotcha.
concessions to help with that $600,000 cost.
Well,
Well, I think that we need a lot more specificity as we move forward for both the taxpayers of Webster and also the potential tenants.
Well, yeah, and like I said, I don't want to have Rob and Tom dangling for a long time. So we're gonna have to, Chris, maybe we come back in the next month and.
Yeah, I mean, truthfully, the intent tonight was so that you guys, everybody got an idea of where we stood, because obviously with this having sort of closed from a submission standpoint 2 months ago or so, 2.5 months ago, wanted to make sure everybody kind of stood where we've been in that time.
Yeah, I appreciate the update, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.